mocked at prom for her skin until the black girl took off her heels and fought back. Imagine being 17, stepping into a ballroom where every light sparkled like a fairy tale, only to hear laughter that wasn't admiration but mockery. She was mocked for the color of her skin, treated like she didn't belong, while the golden boys of the school circled her like predators. But what no one there knew, what they could never have imagined, was that this quiet transfer girl carried a secret she had trained for since childhood. And when they pushed her too far, when the whispers turned into hands that tried to own her, she did something that left the entire prom in stunned silence. Stay with me, because the way this night ends is not what anyone expected. The night Amara Williams walked into Northbridge High for the first time, she already knew what it felt like to stand out. She had felt it on the bus ride that morning, eyes flicking to her dark skin as if she carried some foreign mark, the subtle shifts in posture when she passed rows of perfectly ironed uniforms, the silence that fell too quickly in a place where laughter had just been buzzing. Northbridge wasn't built for girls like her. Its red brick buildings gleamed with wealth. Its polished glass trophy cases overflowed with victories earned by families who had walked those halls for generations. Amara came from a different world, one where the sound of basketballs on cracked pavement and the echo of church choirs filled her childhood afternoons. Her mother's calloused hands worked double shifts so she could afford textbooks, not tennis lessons. Every step Amara took into that gleaming school was a reminder that she was not just new, she was other. Her mother's last words that morning had echoed in her ears like a prayer. "Keep your chin up, baby. Don't let them think they've beaten you before you begin." But inside the corridors of Northbridge, whispers followed Amara like shadows. They didn't even try to hide it. "Who's she? Transfer from the city, right? Looks out of place." Words dropped like stones, each one chipping away at the shield Amara tried to carry. Still, her walk was steady, her spine straight. She had learned young that if you let people see fear, they never forgot it. It didn't take long for the first real test to find her. At the far end of the hallway, she heard the sound before she saw it. A chant, rough laughter, sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. Pushing through the gathered crowd, Amara's eyes landed on Elijah Walker. He was slight, glasses askew, his books scattered like leaves across the floor. 3 boys had him boxed against the lockers, one of them tall with sharp cheekbones and hair styled like he was born on the cover of a magazine. Chase Mitchell. Even before anyone said his name, Amara knew he was the kind of boy who had never been told no, the kind of boy who thought the school belonged to him. Beside him loomed Connor Hayes, broad as a linebacker, his laughter carrying like it was meant to wound. "Pick them up, Walker," Chase sneered, his foot grinding down on Elijah's open notebook, the words on the page smeared under his designer sneaker. "Come on. Don't you want to show us how smart you are?" Phones hovered in the air, recording like it was a show worth remembering. Not one teacher in sight. Not one student stepping forward. Amara froze for a breath, her heart pounding against her ribs, the weight of her mother's prayer pressing in. She could have turned away. It was her first day, and she barely knew where her locker was. But then she saw Elijah's face. A boy clutching at what little dignity he had left, eyes shining not with tears but with a hopelessness that told her this wasn't the first time and wouldn't be the last. Something in Amara broke open. Her voice cut through the jeering like a blade. "Back off him." Heads whipped toward her. Chase turned, surprise flickering across his perfect mask before he smiled, slow and mocking. "And who are you supposed to be?" His eyes swept over her deliberately, from her braids tied back neatly to the thrifted cardigan her mother had saved for weeks to buy. He looked at her like she was nothing, and the crowd ate it up. "I said back off." Her tone didn't waver. Connor chuckled, stepping forward. "Looks like we've got ourselves a hero. What are you going to do, city girl? File a complaint?" His voice dripped with contempt, but underneath it was something sharper. Older, a lesson learned from fathers at dinner tables where jokes were made about people who looked like her. Amara's fists curled at her sides, years of quiet discipline humming in her bones. She didn't move closer, not yet. Instead, she met Chase's gaze head-on. "You think this school belongs to you, but it doesn't. It belongs to all of us. Even him." She pointed toward Elijah, who stared at her like he couldn't believe anyone would speak up. The silence that followed wasn't clean. It was jagged, broken by murmurs, by uncomfortable shifts in the crowd. Some of the students lowered their phones, shame creeping in. But Chase didn't. His smile widened like a cat toying with prey. You've got spirit. I'll give you that. But you're new here, so let me explain how it works. People like you? You learn your place. You keep your head down. You stay out of hours. The words burned not because they surprised her but because they didn't. She had heard them before in 100 different forms, from shopkeepers who watched her too closely, from neighbors who whispered when her mother came home late, from teachers who acted shocked when her test scores outshone the golden children. It was the same story, different walls. For a moment the air was heavy, pressing down on her chest. But then Elijah bent, gathering his scattered papers with trembling hands, and Amara saw it, the quiet plea in his eyes. Don't leave me alone in this. And she knew she wouldn't. Not today. Not ever. Her voice dropped low and razor sharp. Say whatever you want. Just remember I don't fold. Something flickered in Chase's expression. A flash of irritation he couldn't hide. Connor shifted uneasily, his laugh drying in his throat. The crowd leaned in, hungry, waiting for the first blow, for the snap of fists or the crack of bone. But Amara didn't swing. Not yet. She just stood her ground, unflinching, her presence like a wall no sneer could dent. At last Chase stepped back, brushing imaginary dust from his blazer. Enjoy your first day, he muttered, his voice colder now. We'll be seeing you around. The crowd broke apart slowly, buzzing with fresh whispers, some impressed, others sharpening new rumors. Phones slipped into pockets, but not before catching every second of what had just unfolded. Elijah stood clutching his books to his chest, his glasses cracked at the corner. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then finally managed. Why did you step in? Amara offered him the faintest of smiles, though her heart still hammered. Because you're not alone anymore. And in that moment, though she couldn't yet see the storms that lay ahead, Amara knew one thing for certain. Her fight at Northbridge had only just begun. By the next morning, Amara realized her first stand at Northbridge hadn't gone unnoticed. Whispers chased her footsteps louder than before, a mix of awe, fear, and scorn. Students turned their heads as she walked past, some with the kind of fleeting respect that vanished as quickly as it appeared, others with smirks that promised trouble was coming. Elijah kept close to her side in the halls now, clutching his books tighter as if her presence was the only thing keeping him from crumbling under the weight of another day. But his eyes told the truth, dark circles etched by years of sleepless nights, shoulders slumped from battles he had fought alone for far too long. He wasn't built to fight back, not in a school where every hand seemed raised against him, and Amara could see how close he was to giving up. It didn't take long for the predators to circle again. Chase Mitchell leaned against the lockers that morning like he owned them, one foot propped casually, his entourage flanking him like shadows. Connor Hayes towered on his left, his thick arms crossed, a grin already curling at the corner of his mouth. Other students slowed to watch, pretending to check their phones but really waiting for the show. Elijah stiffened beside her, his breathing shallow, but Amara's stride never faltered. She could feel their eyes cutting into her, but she refused to let her chin drop. Well, well, Chase drawled, his voice carrying through the corridor with deliberate ease. If it isn't our new transfer. Hope you enjoyed your first night in paradise. His eyes glimmered with mock politeness, the kind that sounded like a compliment but landed like a slap. Find yourself a nice little corner to fit into? Maybe share a room with Walker here. Connor chuckled at that, and a few students snickered along, eager to prove their loyalty to the king of the hall. Amara stopped in front of him, her face steady though her chest tightened with heat. I'm doing just fine, she said calmly, her voice sharp enough to cut the laughter around them. Chase's smile widened like a wolf scenting blood. I'm glad to hear it. Adjusting must be hard for people like you. He let the words hang in the air, his tone deliberate, leaving no doubt what he meant. A ripple of unease moved through the crowd but no one spoke. No one ever spoke. Connor leaned forward, his grin razor thin. Maybe you can tutor Elijah in street smarts. Show him how to be more authentic. His voice was dripping with sarcasm, every syllable barbed. Elijah's face flushed crimson, his lips parting in disbelief. What's that supposed to mean? Elijah asked, his voice trembling though he tried to sound firm. Connor laughed, the sound cruel and loud. Oh, come on, you know what it means. You're too proper, too buttoned up. Maybe hanging around Amara will help you loosen up. Teach you some real urban culture. Phones lifted again, screens glowing like spotlights. Chase lifted his own, holding it out like he was documenting a historic moment. Smile for the camera, he said smoothly. Northbridge's first study group. A true cultural exchange. Elijah looked down, his hands shaking so badly his books nearly slipped from his grip. Amara's jaw tightened, her pulse pounding in her ears. She stepped forward, her voice as steady as her stance. His culture is being at the top of the class while you're repeating junior year. For the first time, Chase's smile faltered. Connor's face flushed, but he tried to cover it with a laugh that rang hollow. The crowd murmured, some with nervous chuckles, others glancing at each other with wide eyes. Amara's words had landed sharp and undeniable, but Chase recovered quickly, slipping the mask back on. He clapped Elijah on the shoulder so hard he stumbled. Exactly, he said loudly, turning it into a performance. Harvard-bound, a real credit to his people. The words oozed poison, their edge more cutting than fists. One of the good ones. The hallway seemed to hold its breath. Elijah froze, every muscle tense, the words slicing deeper than any shove. Amara's fists twitched at her sides, her body begging for release, but Elijah's hand darted out, gripping her wrist. His voice was low, urgent. Don't. That's what they want. They say the worst things, then twist it to make us the aggressors. The bell rang, sharp and jarring, scattering the crowd. Chase slipped his phone into his blazer pocket with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. See you around, study partners. The words were casual, but the promise behind them was heavy as iron. As the crowd thinned, Elijah bent to gather his books, his hands trembling, his voice a whisper. You were right to say what you did. But you can't give them what they're hunting for. They want you to swing first. They want the story to be about you, not them. He tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. One more year, Amara. That's all I've got to get through. One more year, then I'm gone. Amara knelt to help him gather the scattered papers, her throat tight with anger she couldn't let out. You shouldn't have to survive like this, she whispered. But even as she said it, she knew the truth. This wasn't going to stop. Not with Chase. Not with Connor. Not in a place where Principal Daniels pretended not to see. And as she stood meeting Elijah's weary eyes, she understood something chilling. This fight wasn't just about surviving the year. It was about survival itself. And she wasn't going to fold. In the weeks that followed, Amara learned the rhythm of Northbridge High, and it was a rhythm she could not escape. The bell rang, the halls filled, and every glance carried weight. Chase and Connor never forgot to remind her she was different, and the school never forgot to look the other way. Teachers smoothed over sharp words, laughed off cruel jokes, and told her she needed to focus on her studies, as if humiliation was a distraction she could simply set aside. The air inside those walls was heavy, thick with the knowledge that no matter how high she held her head, she was always walking into a storm. Elijah carried the storm too. Each day his eyes sank deeper into themselves, his shoulders hunching as though trying to fold into invisibility. The boy who once answered questions at the top of the class now whispered, speaking only when called. His brilliance was dimming beneath the weight of cruelty, and it broke something inside Amara to see it. More than once she found herself picking gum out of his hair with steady hands while he blinked hard to keep the tears from falling. Don't give them the satisfaction, he'd murmur, as though repeating a prayer he no longer believed in. But his voice trembled, and Amara could hear the cracking of someone who had been fighting alone for too long. The cruelty sharpened as spring deepened. Notes stuffed into Amara's locker with slurs scrawled across them, her gym shoes thrown into the showers, Elijah locked inside the supply closet until the janitor found him hours later. Each incident chipped at the thin wall that kept her fury contained. At night she lay awake staring at the ceiling, her body buzzing with the energy of fights she hadn't thrown. She remembered her fists hitting heavy bags back home, the sound of gloves against leather, the discipline that had kept her from breaking apart. But here fists meant danger. Here a single swing would paint her as the aggressor, the troublemaker, the stereotype they were waiting to brand her with. She clenched her hands into the sheets instead, whispering her mother's words to herself until sleep came like surrender. The worst part was the silence of those who pretended not to see. Girls she passed in the bathroom straightened their hair and avoided her gaze. Boys in varsity jackets laughed along with Chase's barbs even when their eyes darted away in shame. Even Principal Daniels chose stillness over justice, shrugging when Elijah's mother came to complain, telling her, "Boys will be boys, ma'am. You know how it is." Those words spread like poison, a shield Chase wore with pride. Authority had become his alibi. One afternoon, as Amara and Elijah sat outside beneath the blooming oaks, Elijah confessed what she had already feared. "I used to dream about this place being my way out," he said, his voice flat, almost brittle. "Scholarship, Harvard, new life. Now I just count the days until it's over. I don't even want to be seen anymore." His hands twisted the strap of his backpack, knuckles white, his eyes fixed on the grass as if it might swallow him whole. Amara felt heat rise in her chest, a blend of sorrow and fury so strong it almost took her breath away. She wanted to shake him, to scream that he couldn't give up now, that his brilliance mattered more than their hate. But instead, she placed her hand lightly on his shoulder, steadying him as much as herself. "You're not alone anymore," she whispered. The words weren't enough, but they were all she had. And then, as if the cruelty of daily life weren't heavy enough, the announcement came. Prom night. Flyers taped to lockers, banners stretched across hallways, girls buzzing in whispers about dresses and limousines, boys talking about suits and after-parties. For most, it was the promise of magic, a night of light and laughter. For Amara and Elijah, it was a warning. She could feel it in the way Chase's gaze lingered on her whenever the word prom was spoken, in the way Connor's smirk widened when their eyes met. Trouble was coming. Elijah tried to laugh it off, but the sound was hollow. "I'll probably stay home," he said, though his eyes betrayed the ache of someone who wanted, just once, to feel included in the fairy tale. Amara shook her head. "No. We'll go. Together." Her voice was calm but unyielding, the kind of decision that wasn't open for debate. For a moment Elijah looked at her with something like disbelief, then something like hope. It was faint, fragile, but it was there. She knew what she was stepping into. She knew the night would not be easy, that Chase and Connor would not let it pass without leaving their mark. But she also knew that if she backed down, if she stayed hidden, they would have already won. Prom wasn't just a dance. It was a battlefield dressed in lights and glitter, and she was walking straight into it with her chin high. Somewhere deep in her bones, the rhythm of gloves against leather stirred again. The fight was coming, and Amara was ready. Prom night arrived draped in lights that glimmered against the polished glass of the downtown ballroom. Students spilled out of black cars in gowns that shimmered like jewels, laughter echoing into the night as though cruelty did not exist. For Amara, stepping onto that red-carpeted entrance felt like stepping onto a stage. Whispers rippled through the crowd the moment she appeared, dressed in a deep emerald gown her mother had saved months to buy, the fabric flowing with quiet grace. Elijah stood beside her in a crisp black tuxedo, his shoulders straighter than usual, his nervousness hidden under a fragile layer of confidence. Together they walked into the golden glow of chandeliers, the air heavy with perfume and the clink of crystal glasses. For the first hour it almost felt like a reprieve. They danced cautiously to a slow song, Elijah's steps unsure but his smile real. For once he wasn't shrinking into the shadows. Amara saw flashes of what could be him laughing with her, shoulders relaxed, belonging to a night that was supposed to celebrate youth, not punish it. She let herself believe in that fragile moment, but deep down, she knew the storm was waiting. It broke at the punch table. Chase Mitchell appeared like a shadow dressed in a tailored navy suit, his smile a mask of charm that never reached his eyes. Connor loomed just behind him, grinning like a man who had already won. Chase's voice slid through the crowd like oil. "You look beautiful tonight," he murmured, stepping closer, the scent of his cologne thick in the air. "That dress really brings out your exotic features." The word dripped with venom disguised as flattery. Amara's hand tightened around the ladle, her jaw clenching. "Excuse me. I said it's a compliment," Chase replied smoothly, leaning closer so his words brushed against her ear. "You should say thank you." His tone was low, commanding, daring her to resist. Her voice cut sharp and clear across the ballroom. "I said no." Heads turned. Music faltered. Students froze mid-step, their eyes widening as phones lifted once again. Elijah appeared at her side, his face set with a resolve Amara hadn't seen in him before. "She said don't touch her," he said firmly, his voice louder than the music. Chase's smile widened, but the anger simmering underneath flickered in his eyes. With a flick of his hand, Connor moved forward, his frame filling the space like a wall of muscle. It happened quickly, too quickly. Connor reached for Amara's phone as if to erase her refusal, to take from her the one thing she could control. But her body reacted before her mind had time to catch up. She slipped off her heels, the movement slow, deliberate, her bare feet grounding her to the floor. For a heartbeat, silence held the room, the sight of her heels in her hand a symbol of something no one had expected. Then when Connor lunged, Amara's stance shifted. Her fist sank into his gut with precision born of years of discipline, the sound of air leaving his lungs louder than the music that crashed back into motion. The room erupted. Gasps, shouts, the crackle of disbelief. Connor stumbled backward, clutching his stomach, his grin gone, his arrogance shattered. Chase swung wildly at Elijah in retaliation, but Elijah ducked, years of quiet endurance exploding into a moment of defiance. He countered with a shove that sent Chase staggering into the table, crimson punch spilling across his expensive suit like a stain he could not wash away. For the first time the balance shifted. The crowd that once watched in silence now buzzed with energy, some voices cheering, others shrieking, all caught in the spectacle of the powerful undone. Phones recorded, but this time the footage did not protect the bullies. It exposed them. Chase tried to recover, pushing himself up with fury etched across his face, but Amara stood her ground, her voice steady, her chest rising and falling with controlled breath. "Don't ever touch me again," she said, her words low but carrying farther than any shout. For once Chase had no reply. Teachers rushed in, pulling them apart, voices shouting over the chaos. But the damage had already been done. The perfect image of Chase Mitchell, the untouchable golden boy of Northbridge, lay cracked beneath the ballroom lights. His mask had slipped, his cruelty laid bare in front of everyone. As Amara stood barefoot on the polished floor, Elijah at her side, she felt no shame, no fear. She felt only the weight of a truth she had carried for years, that sometimes the only way to survive was to stand, to refuse to bow, to fight back when silence threatened to erase you. And in that glittering ballroom, under the eyes of every student and teacher, she had done just that. The night wasn't over, but something irreversible had shifted. Northbridge would never look at her the same way again. Neither would Chase. And as she slipped her heels back into her hands, her heart still pounding, Amara knew the battle wasn't finished, but she had just claimed her first victory. The music had long since died when Amara and Elijah stepped out of the ballroom, the cool night air clinging to their skin like relief. Behind them, teachers scrambled to control the chaos, and students whispered furiously, phones still buzzing with the footage that would soon pass from hand to hand. Chase had been dragged from the room red-faced and seething, his suit stained, his power cracked for the first time. Connor leaned against the wall, wheezing from the blow he had never expected to receive. And yet, as Amara stood beneath the glow of the streetlights, barefoot heels dangling from her hand, she felt none of the shame they had hoped to force upon her. Instead, she felt lighter, as if every punch she had not thrown over the years had finally found its voice. Elijah walked beside her in silence for a long stretch, his hands trembling at his sides, his glasses slightly askew. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked with something between disbelief and awe. "You didn't just stand up to them. You broke them." His words weren't triumphant. They carried the weight of someone who had been silenced for too long, and could barely process what freedom felt like. Amara turned to him, her chest still rising and falling, her voice steadier than she felt. "No. We stood up to them. Together." She could see it in his eyes, the boy who once whispered answers now holding his head higher, if only slightly. Something had shifted in him too, something fragile but real. The following days at Northbridge were unlike any Amara had imagined. Whispers still followed her, but they had changed. Some carried admiration, some fear, some quiet gratitude. Students who had once stood by now looked at her differently, as though she had exposed a truth they had been too afraid to name. The footage spread across the school, and though Principal Daniels tried to downplay the incident as an unfortunate scuffle, the images were undeniable. Chase's cruelty, Connor's arrogance, and the way they had been brought down were burned into the memory of every witness. The Golden Boy's mask had cracked, and no amount of authority could glue it back together. Chase's family tried to shield him, their wealth and influence pushing against the whispers, but even privilege had limits when truth was captured in the open. He returned to school days later with his head lowered, his swagger dimmed. For the first time, the hallways did not part for him. Students looked away, not out of respect, but out of shame for having followed him so blindly. His smirk, once ever present, faltered under the weight of stares that no longer cheered him on. Elijah, on the other hand, seemed to breathe again. He answered questions in class, his hand steady as it rose. He laughed once during lunch, the sound startling him as much as it did Amara. The boy who had counted the days until escape now counted them differently, not as steps toward survival, but as proof that he could stand in the light without shrinking. And Amara knew that, while she had thrown the punch, it was his courage beside her that had truly broken the silence. Still, the cost was not small. Amara sat in Principal Danielle's office one afternoon, her mother at her side, listening as he spoke in clipped tones about appropriate conduct and the importance of composure. His words slid over her like cold water, trying to reshape her into the kind of student who endured without protest. But when her mother leaned forward, her voice strong and unwavering, Amara felt pride swell in her chest. "My daughter defended herself," her mother said. "If you can't see the difference between discipline and dignity, maybe you're the one who needs to learn." Daniels had no reply. The silence that followed spoke louder than anything he could have said. The final bell of that week rang with a weight Amara had not expected. As she and Elijah walked out together, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the pavement. For the first time, those shadows didn't feel suffocating. They felt like proof that they were still standing, that no amount of hate could erase them. Students passed by, some offering quiet nods, others avoiding their gaze, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the look on Elijah's face, the faint but unmistakable spark of hope that had returned. Amara glanced at him, her heels still in her hand, the memory of that ballroom fight alive in her bones. "You said you just wanted to survive this year," she whispered. "But maybe it's not about survival anymore. Maybe it's about showing them that we belong here, no matter what they say." Elijah nodded slowly, his eyes meeting hers with a steadiness that hadn't been there before. "Then let's show them." As they walked into the fading light, Amara felt the weight of the battle behind them and the promise of more ahead. But for the first time since stepping into Northbridge, she didn't feel like an outsider. She felt like someone who had taken back her place, who had proved that silence only lasts until someone finds the courage to break it. And though the road ahead was long, she knew she wouldn't be walking it alone. Her mother's words returned to her, steady as a heartbeat. "Keep your chin up, baby. Don't let them think they've beaten you before you begin." Amara smiled faintly, her chin high, her stride strong. The fight wasn't over. But she had already won the first round. If this story stirred something in you, don't forget to like and share it, because too many voices like Amara's go unheard until someone chooses to amplify them. And if you want more stories that refuse to stay silent, make sure you subscribe and join us here tomorrow. But let me ask you, have you ever witnessed a moment when someone stood up to injustice, and it changed everything? Tell me your story in the comments below. I'd love to read it.